The transport ship broke through the clouds of Prime, and Tors pressed her face against the viewing window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Below her stretched a world that no human had ever attended school on before this year. The Academy of Interstellar Studies sat in the middle of a vast purple forest, its buildings made of some kind of crystal that caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into 1,000 different colors. She was 17 years old, and she was about to become one of the first 12 humans to ever study at the most famous school in the galaxy. Her mother had cried at the spaceport back on Earth. Her father had given her a long hug and told her to remember everything he had taught her. Her little brother had made her promise to bring back something cool from an alien planet. She had promised all of them that she would make them proud, that she would show the galaxy that humans deserved their place among the stars. Now, watching the alien world grow larger in the window, she felt the weight of that promise settling on her shoulders. The shuttle landed on a platform made of the same crystal as the buildings. When the doors opened, stepped out into air that smelled like nothing she had ever experienced before. It was sweet, almost like flowers, but with something sharp underneath that made her nose tingle. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth, and she felt like she could jump higher than normal if she tried. A crowd of alien students had gathered to watch the human arrivals, saw species she recognized from her studies, and others she had never seen before. There were the tall reptilian beings with scales that shimmered in different colors. There were the slender humanoids with skin that glowed with soft light. There were the mantids, insect-like creatures who moved in perfect coordination with each other. And there were dozens of others, all watching the 12 humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open hostility. Lifted her chin and walked forward. She would not let them see her fear. The registration building was enormous, with ceilings so high that she could barely see the top. Floating platforms carried students between different levels, and holographic signs pointed the way to various departments. Followed the signs for new student orientation, trying not to bump into anyone as she navigated the crowded halls. She found the other human students waiting in a small room near the back of the building. There were 11 of them, representing different countries and backgrounds from Earth. They had all been selected through a rigorous process that tested their intelligence, their adaptability, and their ability to represent humanity in a positive light. A boy with dark skin and kind eyes introduced himself as Daniel. He was from Nigeria, and he told that he had been studying alien mathematics since he was 6 years old. A girl with short hair and a confident smile said her name was Casey Parker, and she had grown up on one of the frontier colonies where humans were just starting to spread beyond Earth. She knew how to fix almost any kind of machine, and had once rebuilt a broken shuttle engine using nothing but spare parts and determination. The other students shared their own stories and began to feel less alone. They were all nervous, all excited, all determined to prove that humans belonged here. They had all worked incredibly hard to earn their places, and they all knew how much was riding on their success. An alien administrator came to give them their orientation briefing. She was her skin pulsing with soft blue light as she spoke. She explained the rules of the academy, the schedule of classes, the expectations for behavior. She warned them that not everyone would welcome their presence, and she encouraged them to report any incidents of harassment to the proper authorities. Listened carefully, taking notes on her data pad. She had prepared for this. She knew that many alien species looked down on humans as primitive newcomers to the galactic stage. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel about 150 years ago, while some of these civilizations had been spacefaring for thousands of years. In their eyes, humans were barely out of the cave. But also knew something that many aliens did not seem to understand. Humans had not survived and thrived on Earth by being weak. They had faced predators with sharper claws and bigger teeth. They had survived ice ages that killed off stronger species. They had spread across every environment on their planet, from frozen tundras to burning deserts, and they had done it through a combination of intelligence, adaptability, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. The aliens might look down on humans now, but believed that would change. It had to change, and she intended to be part of making that happen. The first week of classes was overwhelming in the best possible way. Had been placed in the advanced xenobiology track, which meant she was studying the biology of different alien species. It was exactly what she had dreamed of doing since she was a little girl watching documentaries about the first contact with aliens. She wanted to understand how life had evolved on different worlds, how different environments had shaped different forms of intelligence, how beings so different from each other could find common ground. Her professors were demanding but fair. Her classmates were brilliant and challenging. She found herself staying up late every night, reading ahead in her textbooks and preparing for the next day's discussions. She was determined to prove that she belonged here, that her placement in the advanced track had not been a mistake. Daniel and Casey were in different tracks, but the three humans made a point of eating together whenever their schedules allowed. They would sit in a corner of the vast dining hall, surrounded by aliens of every shape and size, and they would compare notes on their experiences. Daniel was struggling with the social aspects of academy life. He was brilliant with numbers and theories, but he found it hard to read the body language of species so different from his own. He told Casey about a time he had accidentally insulted a mantid student by making direct eye contact, which was apparently a challenge to combat in their culture. The mantid had been understanding once Daniel explained his mistake, but the incident had shaken his confidence. Casey was having the opposite problem. She was too confident, too quick to speak her mind, and some of the more traditional alien students found her directness offensive. She had already gotten into 2 shouting matches with students who had made comments about human inferiority. Worried that Casey's temper would get her into serious trouble sooner or later. As for herself, she was trying to find a middle path. She was friendly but not pushy, confident but not aggressive. She made a point of learning about the customs of different species, of showing respect even to those who did not show respect to her. She believed that the best way to change minds was through patience and example, not through confrontation. It was during her second week that she met Lyra. The girl was in several of his classes, and she seemed genuinely curious about humans in a way that felt different from the mocking curiosity of some other students. Her bioluminescent skin would pulse with soft colors when she was thinking, and found herself fascinated by the way communicated as much through light as through words. They started studying together, helping each other with subjects where one was stronger than the other. Lyra was excellent at the theoretical aspects of xenobiology, but struggled with the practical laboratory work. Was the opposite, her hands steady and skilled when it came to actual experiments, but sometimes lost in the complex theories that Lyra seemed to grasp instinctively. Through Lyra began to make other friends. A mantid named Click, whose actual name was an untranslatable series of sounds, turned out to share her love of Earth music. He would ask her to play songs on her data pad, his compound eyes flickering with what she learned was their version of joy. A young female named was in rebellion against her traditional family and found human culture fascinating precisely because her parents would have disapproved. Slowly, day by day, began to feel like she might actually belong here. But not everyone wanted humans to feel welcome. Made his presence known from the very first day of classes. He was impossible to miss, standing nearly 7 feet tall with scales the color of dried blood. He was the son of a senator in the Dominion, one of the most powerful political bodies in the galaxy, and he carried himself with the arrogance of someone who had never been told no in his entire life. His family had been vocal opponents of the Accords, the treaty that had finally given humanity a seat at the galactic table. They believed that humans were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too savage to be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. They pointed to human history, to the wars and atrocities that had marked their path to the stars, as evidence that the species should be contained rather than welcomed. Seemed determined to prove his family's point by provoking the human students into exactly the kind of violent response that would justify their prejudice. The harassment started small, a shoulder bump in the hallway that sent stumbling into a wall, a comment in class about how certain species should know their place, a laugh that always seemed to follow whenever a human student made a mistake or struggled with an assignment. Ignored it. She had dealt with bullies before, back on Earth, and she knew that the worst thing you could do was give them the reaction they wanted, was trying to make her angry, trying to make her lose control. She refused to give him that satisfaction, but was not used to being ignored. In the third week of the semester, arrived at her laboratory station to find her equipment covered in some kind of sticky substance. She recognized it from her studies as a territorial marker, a scent gland secretion that males used to claim ownership of objects or spaces. To any species with a sensitive enough nose, the message was clear. This belongs to me. This human belongs to me. She cleaned up the mess without saying anything, but she noticed the Way watched her from across the room, his secondary jaw clicking with amusement. His followers, a group of young males who seemed to exist only to laugh at his jokes and follow his orders, made hissing sounds that she had learned was their version of laughter. The next day, she found the same substance on her chair in the dining hall. The day after that, on the door to her dormitory room. Each time she cleaned it up and said nothing, but each time the message was harder to ignore. Finally, she reported the incidents to the academy administration. The investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, documented every instance of harassment, saved every piece of evidence, followed every procedure exactly as she had been instructed. She was determined to handle this the right way, through proper channels, showing that humans could resolve conflicts without resorting to violence. The investigation concluded with a finding of insufficient evidence. His father made a substantial donation to the academy the following week, and the matter was quietly dropped. Casey was furious when she heard the news. She wanted to confront directly, to make him pay for what he had done. Daniel suggested they request transfers to different classes, different schedules, anything to avoid further conflict. Lyra offered to speak to some of the other students about forming a coalition against harassment. Thanked them all, but said she needed time to think. That night she called her mother on Earth. The time delay made conversation difficult, with long pauses between each exchange, but she needed to hear a familiar voice. She told her mother about the harassment, about the failed investigation, about the frustration of being treated as less than equal despite doing everything right. Her mother listened without interrupting, her face serious on the screen. When finished, there was a long pause as the signal traveled across the light years between them. "Do you remember what I taught you?" her mother finally asked. Nodded. Her mother had been a military instructor before was born, teaching hand-to-hand combat to soldiers who might one day need to fight for their lives. She had started teaching as soon as she was old enough to walk, not because she wanted her daughter to be a fighter, but because she wanted her daughter to be able to protect herself. "I remember," said. "Then you know that fighting is always the last resort," her mother continued. "But it is a resort. Sometimes when everything else fails, you have to be willing to stand up for yourself, not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because some people only understand strength." "I have been trying to handle this the right way," said. "I know you have, and I am proud of you for that, but the right way does not always work. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes the rules protect the wrong people." Her mother's eyes were hard now, the eyes of a woman who had seen the worst that people could do to each other. "If it comes to a fight, you end it quickly. You make it clear that you are not prey, and then you walk away. Do you understand?" "I understand," said. After the call ended, she sat in her dormitory room for a long time, thinking about what her mother had said. She did not want to fight. She had come here to learn, to build bridges, to prove that humans could be trusted. Violence would only confirm the prejudices that species like the already held about humanity. But she was also tired. Tired of being harassed. Tired of being dismissed. Tired of following rules that seemed to apply only to her while her tormentors faced no consequences. She made a decision. She would continue to try the peaceful approach. She would continue to report incidents and follow procedures. But if pushed her too far, if he gave her no other choice, she would be ready. The next morning, she woke up an hour early and went to the empty gymnasium on the lower level of the dormitory building. She had not trained seriously since arriving at the academy, too busy with her studies to maintain her old routines. That would change now. She started with stretches, loosening muscles that had grown stiff from too many hours hunched over textbooks. Then she moved through the forms her mother had taught her, the patterns of movement that had been drilled into her body since childhood. Punches and kicks, blocks and throws, the flow of combat that became almost meditative once she found the rhythm. She trained for an hour, until her muscles burned and sweat soaked through her clothes. Then she showered, dressed, and went to her first class of the day as if nothing had changed. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern. Study, train, sleep. Attend classes, avoid, spend time with her friends. Report harassment when it occurred, accept the inevitable dismissal, move on. She was building something inside herself, a core of steel that would not bend no matter how much pressure was applied. Seemed to sense the change in her. His harassment became more personal, more targeted. He started following her between classes, always keeping just enough distance that she could not accuse him of anything specific. His comments in class became more pointed, more clearly aimed at her rather than humans in general. He wanted her to break. He needed her to break. She refused. 3 months into the semester, the situation reached a turning point. Was in the recreation hall, studying for an upcoming exam. It was late evening, the time when most students were either at dinner or in their rooms. She preferred the quiet, the chance to focus without distractions. The recreation hall was nearly empty, just a few students scattered around the large space, too absorbed in their own activities to pay attention to anyone else. She did not hear approach until his shadow fell across her data pad. She looked up slowly, keeping her expression neutral. He stood over her, flanked by 4 of his followers. They had arranged themselves in what she recognized as a hunting formation, a pattern from their predatory past that they probably did not even realize they were using. It was instinct, hard-wired into their biology. They saw her as prey. "The little human thinks it belongs here," said. His voice was loud, meant to be heard by everyone in the room. Sitting in spaces meant for real civilizations, using facilities built by your betters. Saved her work and closed her data pad. "I have as much right to be here as you do." "Rights," he spat, as if the word itself was offensive. "Your species has been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. Mine built empires while yours was still throwing rocks at each other in caves." "And yet here we both are," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "Studying at the same school, taking the same classes. Funny how that works." His hand moved faster than she could react, slapping the data pad out of her grip. It clattered across the floor, the screen cracking against the polished stone. Around the room, other students froze, watching the confrontation with expressions of shock and fear. "Pick it up," commanded, "on your knees like the animal you are." Stood instead. She rose slowly, deliberately, meeting his gaze without flinching. She barely reached his chest, but she refused to let his size intimidate her. No. The recreation hall had gone completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Every eye was fixed on the standoff between the towering noble and the small human female who dared to defy him. Scales rippled with color, cycling through shades of red that indicated rising fury. His secondary jaw clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. He was not used to being refused. He did not know how to handle it. You dare refuse me?" His voice had dropped, becoming dangerous. "Do you have any idea who I am? What my family could do to your pathetic little planet?" "I know exactly who you are," said quietly. "You are a bully who hides behind his father's name. That is all you are." He hit her. The blow came without warning, his open palm striking her across the face with enough force to send her stumbling backward. She tasted blood where her cheek had split against her teeth. Pain exploded through her skull, and for a moment her vision went dark. But she did not fall. She caught herself against a table, one hand pressed to her bleeding face, and forced herself to straighten. Blood ran down her chin, dripping onto the polished floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear laughing, his followers joining in with their hissing amusement. "Finally," he said, "the human shows its true nature, weak, fragile, pathetic. You should never have been allowed among your betters." He reached for her again, his claws extended. This time, he clearly intended to do real damage. His followers shifted behind him, cutting off any escape route. The other students in the room remained frozen, too afraid to intervene. Watched his hand descending toward her face, and something inside her shifted. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. In its place rose something older, something deeper. A survival instinct that humanity had carried since the days when they hunted mammoths and ran from saber-toothed cats. An ability to shut down everything except the immediate need to survive. Her mother had called it the switch, the moment when training took over and conscious thought stepped aside. Most humans never experienced it, living in a world too safe to require such responses, but had trained for this. She had prepared for this. And now, in the space between one heartbeat and the next, she flipped the switch. Everything slowed down. She saw claws coming toward her, but they seemed to be moving through water. She had time to analyze his stance, to note the way his weight was distributed, to identify the weaknesses in his position. He was big and strong, but he was also arrogant. He expected her to cower, to freeze, to accept whatever he wanted to do to her. He did not expect her to fight back. She moved. Her body dropped low beneath his reaching claws, and her foot swept out in a motion she had practiced more times than she could count. It was a technique called a reaping throw, designed to use an opponent's momentum against them. Against a human opponent, it would have been effective. Against who had never encountered this kind of fighting, it was devastating. His feet went out from under him. He fell. The noble crashed to the floor with a sound like a sack of rocks hitting stone. His armored back absorbed most of the impact, but his head snapped back against the polished surface, leaving him stunned and disoriented. His followers stood frozen, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Did not give him time to recover. She was on him before he could rise, her knee driving into the nerve cluster beneath his secondary arm. She had learned about this spot in her xenobiology classes, a dense concentration of sensory neurons that used for fine manipulation. The textbook had described it as highly sensitive to pressure. What the textbook had not mentioned was how much it hurt when that pressure was applied with focused intent. Screamed. The sound echoed through the recreation hall, a high-pitched shriek of agony that bore no resemblance to his usual confident voice. His scales cycled through colors she had never seen before, patterns of pain and shock, and something that might have been fear. Grabbed his primary arms and wrenched them behind his back, locking them in a joint hold that would have dislocated a human shoulder. Joints were more flexible, which just meant she could apply more pressure. She cranked the hold, driving his face into the floor. "You touched me," she said, her voice calm and cold. Blood still dripped from her face, landing on his crimson scales. That was a mistake. One of his followers took a step forward, claws extended. Looked at him, just looked at him, and he froze. Whatever he saw in her eyes made him reconsider his decision. "Anyone else?" she asked. No one moved. She held in place for another moment, letting the reality of the situation sink in for everyone watching. Then she spoke directly into the air, knowing that surveillance systems were recording everything. My name is Tors. I am a human student at the Academy of Interstellar Studies. I was physically assaulted by, and I defended myself. I request that security review this footage and take appropriate action. She released him, scrambled to his feet, his scales still cycling through chaotic patterns. He was shaking, whether from pain or shock or some combination of the two. His followers clustered around him, but none of them seemed to know what to do. Retrieved her damaged data pad from the floor. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. She tucked it under her arm and turned to face one last time. "Stay away from me," she said quietly. "Stay away from all human students. If you touch any of us again, what I did tonight will seem gentle by comparison." She turned her back on him and walked out of the recreation hall. Behind her, the room remained frozen. Heir to one of the most powerful families in the Empire, stood motionless among his followers. Every alien in the room stared at the door through which the human had disappeared, their understanding of humanity forever changed. The walk back to her dormitory felt like it took hours, though it was probably only minutes. Kept her pace steady, her head high, her expression neutral. Inside, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her hands trembled, and her knees felt weak. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving exhaustion in its wake. She made it to her room before she collapsed. She sat on the edge of her bed, shaking, and finally allowed herself to feel everything she had been suppressing. The fear, the anger, the relief, the lingering pain from the blow to her face, which was already swelling and would probably turn spectacular colors by morning. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. She had refused to be a victim. But as the shaking subsided and her mind began to clear, a new worry took its place. What would happen now? Would she be expelled for fighting? Would family use their influence to destroy her? Had she just ruined everything she had worked so hard to achieve? A knock at her door made her jump. She opened it to find Lyra standing in the hallway, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with colors that had learned indicated concern. Behind her stood Daniel and Casey, both looking worried. "We heard what happened," Lyra said. "Are you all right?" Managed a weak smile. "I will be." They came inside, the four of them crowding into her small room. Casey immediately started examining the cut on his face, her practical frontier upbringing kicking in. Daniel hovered awkwardly, clearly wanting to help but not knowing how. Lyra simply sat beside on the bed, her skin pulsing in a rhythm that was somehow soothing. "The footage is already spreading," Casey said as she cleaned the wound with a medical kit from her bag. "Someone uploaded it to the student network. By morning, everyone is going to have seen it." "I did not know humans could move like that," Lyra said softly. "I did not know anyone could move like that." "Neither did," Casey said with a fierce grin. "You should have seen his face. I heard he has not stopped shaking." "This is serious," Daniel said, his voice tight with worry. "His family has connections. They could make trouble for all of us." "Let them try," Casey said. "The whole galaxy just saw their precious heir get taken down by a human girl half his size. No amount of money is going to make that go away." They talked late into the night, planning for possible consequences and celebrating the victory in equal measure. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with them, and Lyra, Daniel, and Casey returned to their own rooms. Lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running the events of the evening through her mind over and over. She had not wanted to fight. She had tried everything else first. But in the end, some people only understood one language, had pushed and pushed, confident that she would never push back. Now he knew better. She wondered if this was how humanity would eventually earn its place in the galaxy. Not through diplomacy alone, not through appeasement, but through demonstrating that they were not to be underestimated. It was not the path she would have chosen, but maybe it was the path that was necessary. Sleep came eventually, bringing dreams of stars and shadows, and a tall figure with crimson scales who fell and never stopped falling. The next morning, woke to find that her life had changed. Her data pad was flooded with messages. Some were congratulations from human students she had never met, spread across academy campuses throughout the galaxy. Some were questions from alien students who wanted to know about human fighting techniques. A few were threats from students loyal too, but these were outnumbered by messages of support. The footage of the confrontation had spread beyond the student network. It was on galactic news feeds, being analyzed by commentators and experts. The 10-second takedown, they called it, the moment when humanity showed its true nature. Watched some of the coverage while eating breakfast in her room, not yet ready to face the crowds in the dining hall. The analysts dissected her movements frame by frame, marveling at her speed, her technique, her calm under pressure. They discussed human physiology, human history, human potential. They debated whether humanity was more dangerous than anyone had realized. One commentator, a historian, offered a perspective that made pause. "We have been thinking about humans all wrong," the historian said. "We looked at their short history in space and saw them as newcomers, as children playing in an adult galaxy. But we forgot to look at their history on Earth. These beings have been fighting for survival since before they were human. Their entire evolutionary history is written in blood and struggle. They did not reach the stars because they were peaceful. They reached the stars because they were the most successful survivors their planet ever produced." Turned off the feed, uncomfortable with being held up as proof of human dangerousness. That was not who she wanted to be. She wanted to be a bridge builder, a diplomat, a scientist, not a symbol of human violence. But maybe, she thought, you could not be one without at least having the capacity to be the other. Maybe true peace only came when both sides knew that war was an option neither wanted to choose. She showered, dressed, and finally ventured out to face whatever the day would bring. The first surprise was gone. She learned from Lyra that he had been summoned to the administration building before dawn and had left the campus within hours. An official announcement stated that he had been suspended pending investigation, but everyone knew what that really meant. The footage was too damaging, too widespread to suppress. His father's money could not make this disappear. The second surprise was the way other students treated her. Where before many had looked at her with contempt or indifference, now they looked at her with something closer to respect. Not all of them, of course. Some of the students glared at her with open hostility, seeing her victory over as an insult to their entire species. But others, even some, nodded at her as she passed, acknowledging what she had done. In her xenobiology class, the professor, an elderly mantid who had never shown any particular interest in her before, called her aside after the lecture. "What you did last night was impressive," the professor said, their translator rendering the clicking speech into standard galactic. "But it has also made you a target. There are those who will want to prove that defeat was a fluke. Be careful." Nodded, accepting the warning. "I will. And one more thing." The professor's compound eyes seemed to study her with new intensity. "I have been teaching at this academy for 40 years. I have seen thousands of students from hundreds of species. I have never seen anyone move the way you did. The speed, the precision, the complete absence of hesitation. Where did you learn this?" "My mother taught me," said simply. The professor was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother must be a remarkable woman." "She is." The days that followed were strange. Found herself famous in a way she had never wanted or expected. News outlets requested interviews, which she declined. Other human students asked her to teach them what she knew, which she agreed to do in limited sessions. Alien students who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to be her friend, which she handled with polite caution. Through it all, she tried to maintain her focus on why she had come here in the first place. She studied for her exams. She completed her laboratory work. She continued her friendship with Lyra and her training sessions with Daniel and Casey. She tried to be the person she had always wanted to be, not the symbol that others wanted to make her. But she could not ignore the way things had changed. Humanity's reputation in the galaxy shifted after the footage spread. Before, humans had been seen as weak and primitive, tolerated rather than respected. Now, people began to look at them differently. They began to wonder what else humans were capable of. They began to understand that a species which had survived everything Earth had thrown at it might not be as harmless as it appeared. The Dominion officially condemned actions and expressed support for the punishment he received. It was a political move, everyone knew, designed to prevent the incident from becoming a larger scandal. But it was also an acknowledgement that things could not go back to the way they had been. More human students were accepted into alien institutions in the following semester. Human diplomats found their opinions being taken more seriously in galactic councils. Human military advisors were suddenly in demand, asked to share their knowledge of the fighting techniques that had never developed among species who had not needed them. And on Prime, at the Academy of Interstellar Studies, a 17-year-old girl continued her education, determined to build a future where such confrontations would no longer be necessary. Tors had wanted to prove that humans belonged among the stars. She had hoped to do it through scholarship, through diplomacy, through patience and understanding. Instead, she had done it in 10 seconds of controlled violence that had shocked a galaxy. It was not the legacy she would have chosen. But as she walked through the crystalline halls of the academy, respected rather than dismissed, she could not deny that it had worked. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where her mother's training lived, she knew she would be ready if it ever became necessary again. Because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They refused to be anyone's prey. The galaxy was beginning to understand that. And Tors, student, scholar, and reluctant warrior, was determined to make sure they never forgot.